Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Just Law on IQRA TV. This is the second part to the show. Just before the break, we were looking at how to make an immigration spouse application, how to sponsor a husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom. Now, just before the break, we looked at what the husband or wife who is abroad, whether it's in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever it is, what they need to do if they are being sponsored to come to the United Kingdom as a spouse. And that's the particular area of immigration law we're looking at today. But whatever your questions are, whether they relate to immigration matters or any other matters, please do feel free to pick up the phone and give us a ring, and inshallah I'll try and give you some guidance in relation to those matters. So just before the break, we looked at one of the things that a husband or wife who's abroad needs to do, which is to get a TB medical certificate. We were looking at the second thing that they need to do, which is to obtain an English certificate, which is at A1 level. Now, just a couple of points in relation to that certificate. One is that it has to be obtained from a particular test centre. So it's not sufficient for somebody to say, look, I've studied and passed tests in English, so I can prove my proficiency in English using the certificate that I've got. Maybe they got that at school, college or university. Generally speaking, that's not acceptable. The English certificate which proves one's ability to speak and listen and converse in English, that certificate has to be obtained from an approved test centre. So that's the first requirement, that it has to be obtained from an approved test centre. The second thing to bear in mind is that the certificate again has a validity date in the same way that a TB and a medical certificate has a validity date. A English certificate has a validity date as well, which is 2 years. So it's a much longer validity period as opposed to the TB or medical certificate, which is only valid for some 6 months. So that's what you need to bear in mind. The English test has to be from an approved centre and it's only valid for 2 years. So you need to make sure, if you don't use it straight away, or if you're unfortunate enough to have your application rejected and you need to apply again, you need to make sure that your certificates are valid. Right, what's the third thing that you need to bear in mind when a spouse application is made? The immigration rules require that you have to submit, if you're making a proper spouse application after you've got married, the immigration rules require that you must submit a proper formal marriage certificate. Immigration rules are quite specific on that, which is, let's take an example. In India, for example, if somebody has just an Islamic marriage at a mosque, the Islamic marriage in itself won't be acceptable, because in India what happens is that marriages are registered and there's a formal marriage certificate which is obtained, which is produced by the registrar for births, marriages, deaths, etc. Similar system to what we have in the UK, but there is a proper official certificate from the registrar, and that's the official certificate which needs to be submitted. For Pakistan, there's more flexibility. Generally speaking, they will accept the certificates that you get from the Union Council or from the Tehsil Mufti office. You don't always have to submit the official NADRA national database certificate, but there's more flexibility in Pakistan. But again, in my experience, where it is possible and you can get the government, official government certificate, it's better to get that, and it's better to submit that. So that's the third document that the immigration rules require when you're making a spouse application. Document that you need from abroad. You've got your TB certificate, you've got your English certificate, and you've got your marriage certificate. Now, on marriages, it's not something that we are going to look at in a lot of detail today, but even on something as simple as a marriage certificate, you need to be aware that there can be complications, and it's important that if your case is anything out of the ordinary, that you must take advice. For example, if either party, whether the person who's abroad come into the UK or whether the person who's living in the UK, if one of the parties have been married, there are rules which relate to how that marriage or relationship has been brought to an end. Have you got an official divorce certificate for that? When did you get married? Did you get married after the official divorce certificate was issued? So there are complications that can arise where your situation is anything other than ordinary. Important that you take advice on that if your situation falls into that category, because immigration rules are very specific in terms of what you need to submit. Now, just on that, before we move on, something that I mentioned in the first part of the show, that the way applications are now made, the way documents are now submitted, that's changed slightly. It's helpful in the sense that it is no longer a requirement for originals of these certificates to be issued. So we don't need, the rules don't require originals of the TB certificate, the marriage certificate, the English certificate to be submitted anymore. If the husband or wife who's abroad, if they can scan these certificates, send it to the sponsor in the UK, that's sufficient when the sponsor submits the document. So that's something helpful in what is normally quite complicated and difficult in terms of compliance with the immigration rules. So they're the three key documents that you need to obtain from your husband or wife who's abroad. One other document which shouldn't cause any difficulties is to obtain a copy of the husband or wife who's abroad, to obtain a copy of their passport. And again, a scanned copy or a clear picture, the Home Office is prepared to accept that. In one sense, the Home Office, in terms of the way it operates now, not necessarily the rules, but in terms of the process for making these applications, the Home Office has taken steps to really try and move into doing things digitally and having applications done online, having documents scanned, etc. More use of scanning of documents, more use of emails, etc. That does make the process easier. So these are in summary, before we move on, the TB certificate, the English certificate, marriage certificate, and a copy of the husband or wife's passport. They're the documents that you need to obtain from your partner who's abroad if you're making an application to sponsor them to come to the UK. Now, to some extent, these are quite, they are sort of the most straightforward aspects of the immigration rules when you're sponsoring your husband or wife. The difficulty that normally arises is in relation to employment, and I'll look at that in greater detail after we've taken our next call. Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। अभी मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले क्वेश्चन किया था वो प्री एक्शन प्रोटोकॉल में, उस बात उसमें एक चीज रह गई थी। एक्चुअली उसका जो मेरे ब्रदर इन लॉ का प्रोपोज्ड विजिट था उसकी डेट एक्सपायर हो जाएगी मीनवाइल अगर वो मंथ और 2 मंथ लगाते हैं, तो डू यू थिंक दिस विल मैटर? क्योंकि वो कहेंगे बिकॉज ही वाज विजिटिंग इन जून, नाउ इट्स जुलाई।
No, it shouldn't matter. What they will do is, they might come back to you and say additional documents. Does he still want to travel? So they might say that, but it won't make a difference. The fact that he said, look, I've got holidays in. Sometimes this is what happens where somebody is employed abroad, is that they've got holidays and they say, look, here's my employment letter which confirms I've got holidays in July. And by the time the application is refused, looked at again, July is gone, and now we're in August or September. It shouldn't cause a problem. They should still look at the application properly. They can't simply say that time has passed, because the time has passed because of a mistake that they made. They can't penalize you for a mistake that they made. So I'm quite confident that shouldn't cause a problem. What they should do, if that's an issue, is come back to you and say, right, okay, you wanted to travel on these dates, confirm that you're still able to travel and you're willing to travel if another visa is issued or there's no problems if a visa is issued in terms of your travel dates, but it shouldn't cause a problem. But thank you very much for that call. And just on that topic, the reality is a lot of people are sponsoring their family members to come to the United Kingdom for a visit visa. And what I will do in the coming weeks is look at how to make, or to try and make, a successful visitor application. What is happening at the moment is obviously the weather gets better, so a lot of people start making sponsoring their family members to come to the UK during the summer holidays. Ideal time for them to come. We had the World Cup going on here, so a lot of people were applying for their family members to come, and they've got tickets for the World Cup, so they're getting trying to sponsor their cousins, brothers, sisters to come over for the cricket as well. Unfortunately, a lot of applications for visit visas to the United Kingdom do get refused. And sometimes it feels like an almost impossible task to obtain a visit visa. What I'll look at in the coming weeks is how to try and increase your chances of making a successful visitor application. Look at what the common reasons are for visas to be refused. Okay, let's just go back to the topic for the day, which is immigration applications, and in particular spouse applications. And where we'd got to was to look at how to make a successful application, and in particular we'd got to the income requirement, which seems to cause a lot of problems for those who are sponsoring their husband or wives to come to the United Kingdom. Now, although we're looking at these applications, if you have any questions relating to immigration law or any other matters, please do feel free to give us a ring. Now, the income requirement is, in my experience, the biggest problem where spouse applications are made, and in my experience, it's where it's the area which results in the vast majority of applications being refused. There's a problem with the income requirement, and that's why the applications are refused. Now, those problems could be because the sponsor in the UK doesn't earn enough money, or they've failed to submit the correct documents, or the format of the documents is incorrect, etc. There could be a whole variety of reasons for refusals, but they seem to be centered around the income requirement. So in a Bob standard application where somebody is employed, the requirement is more straightforward. The problem is the sponsors don't always fall into this neat category of having been employed by an employer for 6 months, where it's relatively easy to make an application. There are people who haven't been employed for 6 months. They've been employed for a while, but with a different employer. They might have started a new employment, or the sponsor might be self-employed, or the sponsor might be in receipt of certain benefits because they're disabled or they're a carer, or they've got insufficient income but they have savings which they want to use to support the spouse application, or they've got rental income that's coming in. So there's a whole different variety of ways in which a sponsor is able to support their husband or wife's immigration application to come to the United Kingdom. And with each of these different categories, there are very specific rules that need to be met, and the immigration rules are very specific, and this is where most people fall into difficulties. For today's purposes, in order to keep matters simple, let's look at the easiest category, where somebody has been employed by an employer for 6 months. To some extent, that's one of the easier types of immigration spouse applications that can be made. The rules require 3 mandatory documents to be submitted, and we'll look at this in greater detail because this is what causes the greatest difficulties. You need an employment letter from the employer confirming that the person is employed, bank statements and wage slips. We'll look at that in greater detail after we've taken a short break.